All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you all for joining us for our March Ascend webinar. This month we have Dr. Grace Cho. She's the Chief Innovation and Commercialization Officer at the University of Nevada, Reno for their Innovation Center. She leads the overall advancement of the university's technology commercialization activities and its Innovation Center, which is a hub of entrepreneurship, collaboration, and job creation in downtown Reno, and is an anchor to the regional innovation ecosystem. Today, she is going to be discussing with us how to launch a university startup. You guys feel free to put in your questions in the chat, and Michael or I will relay it to her during the presentation. And then we'll also have a little bit of time at the end too for any follow-up questions. I'll go ahead and pass over to you. Thank you, Dr. Cho.
Thank you, everyone. And I want to thank Sam Hop for inviting me to speak to all of you. I want to make this very casual and interactive. So if you have questions, please do raise them during the talk. And let me start by just having a quick disclaimer. This is really for educational purposes. I'm not really here to provide any legal or business advice. So if you worked in the technology transfer office, you know that there are two ways to commercialize the technology, either through licensing or form a university spin-out. Now, some of the slides I'm going to be speaking very much to an entrepreneur, a faculty entrepreneur. Some of the slides I may be speaking to the tech transfer personnel or both. But I think the content is definitely relevant to a university spin-out. So the two ways to take a technology from the lab to the market is one through licensing. And if you find the right commercial partner, meaning that a company that has the capability, the infrastructure, and the resources to take invention from the lab to market. Infrastructure could be not just research infrastructure, but marketing channels, manufacturing, and all that's required to taking a product to market. And it's often suited for invention that's sort of a plug-in, right, to an existing industry. So for example, we recently licensed a technology to the construction industry, and the company that we licensed the technology has all of the infrastructure, the channels, the customers, and they have the equipment, and we have a sensor that can be installed on the equipment to really improve certain aspects of the construction. So that would be, I would say, an ideal case where you do the licensing because the company has the right capability and the resources to take this technology to market. And licensing can be exclusive or non-exclusive. So when you do exclusive licensing, and you really have to be very careful who you choose as the partner, because basically that partner lock up your rights. Non-exclusive, however, is more suitable when you have a technology that you want it to be very pervasive. Becomes industry standard. Sometimes it could be a software technology that you want to become industry standard. You want to non-exclusively license that to as many people as you can. And in the biotech industry, there's a very good example, and that is the recombinant DNA technology from Stanford. It's the Cohen-Boyer patent. Actually, one of the inventors was Berkeley, the other inventor from Stanford. This technology basically started the biotech industry. And Stanford non-exclusively licensed to many biotech startups and really became the impetus for the birth of the biotech industry. Now, not everything is suitable for licensing, and very often, depending on the circumstances, the faculty's entrepreneurial desire, among other things, that spin-out might be the way to license a to commercialize a technology. And usually is a disruptive technology or with significant market opportunity that can actually form the basis of a fundable startup. You know, if the startup is going to scale and commercialize technology, it often requires outside capital. And so the company has to be fundable. And investors usually don't want to invest in a one-trick pony. So does it have a significant market opportunity? Is it a technology enough to either disrupt the market or the current status quo? Sometimes it's not clear who will be the right industry partner to realize the full potential of the technology. In that case, the spinoff could also be a way to get the technology to market. But doing a university spin-out is a lot more work, a lot higher risk, and potentially higher returns than licensing. So the important consideration, the question I always ask is that, what is the route to market with the optimum chance of success? And success also means speed as well as scale. How do we have a venue where we can scale the technology and benefit society? So to consider whether university spin-out is suitable, there's a number of factors to consider. The technology itself, is it a improvement, or is it a radically different technology, new technology that have the potential to disrupt the market? Does the university have a strong IP portfolio that can provide significant barrier to entry by competitor? And this is important if the company wants to raise venture capital. Investors will want to see that there is barrier to entry by the competition. And patents, for example, are very effective barriers to entry. Does the company have the potential to raise capital? And if you look at venture capital or any sophisticated investors, they're looking for a certain return because they have a portfolio. Some of the startups going to fail, and some is going to do quite well. And they need those companies that are doing well to do so well to give them 5-10x return in order for the portfolio to have a return. So they're looking at the big market, they're looking at the management team, and they're looking at a lot of different things. The other thing to consider is that, is the startup capital efficient in developing the product and get to market? So capital efficiency means that how much money does it take to actually get the product to market? And we know in biotech drug development, it could take excess of $1 billion. But often the startup will have to partner with pharmaceutical companies. But if you have a renewable energy that require a lot of development, or even battery technology that require manufacturing of a construction of a brand new battery line or manufacturing facility, that's very capital intensive. And it's difficult to get venture investment unless you have a way to figure out how you're going to scale and get to the point where you might need project financing, because risk capital is not going to take you to where you need to go. So the other consideration is entrepreneurial opportunities. So the university researcher may be entrepreneurial and has a desire, want to be a co-founder, and also the capacity to be able to continue adding value, especially in the initial early stage of the company. But the company also need a CEO to manage the day-to-day operation. And I'm going to get into a lot more detail about that. So often the challenge here is that to finding that CEO candidate that shares the vision of the scientific co-founder and has experience and background to take on the challenge of building the company. And the other thing to consider is internally, university, what kind of incubation support do we have to help these startup companies, whether it's BIR, STTR support, non-diluted capital, or finding a CEO, or some university have a small fund to help de-risk the technology, and or sending people to NSF I-Corp to get some training. So these are all considerations before university wanted to embark on this challenge. So starting a company, I think for most people, they don't, especially faculty researchers, they don't understand how difficult it is. Most startups fail. I think 9 out of 10 startups fail. I used to work in Silicon Valley. There's just a lot of startups that you don't hear about. They sound great at the beginning. They even get venture funding to Series A, Series B. Eventually, they fail. University startup probably even higher risk, just because they don't have a lot of what it takes at the beginning. So to start a company, so there's the chicken or egg question, right? So at the university, we generally are what I called a technology push or inside out approach. We have a technology, where's the market? And we need to find a CEO and let's build a company. The other way is to an outside in, which is an entrepreneur that's already out there, identify a problem, a market need, and he or she needs a technology in order to move forward. And that would be outside in, and that would be more of a market pool. But I think most universities spin out at least the ones I've seen, are really the first bullet, and which presents challenges in itself. So the technology is just one piece of the puzzle, right? There has to be a business plan where what is the product? When I speak to faculty, sometimes they can't translate their technology idea to an actual product that people wanted to pay. Who are your customers? And how do you make money? And the business model and the whole cost structure and the whole competition. And sometimes I ask entrepreneurs and faculty alike, who's your competition? The answer I often get is that we have no competition. Well, if you're solving an important problem, by definition, there will be a competition. Whether it's someone to pursue a similar approach, or the status quo, do nothing, or a completely different approach to solving the same problem. So understanding competitive landscape is very important. Building a team, and I'm going to get into this a little bit more, but the team surrounding yourself with the right people, with the complementary expertise is very important. And then there's the whole legal steps. What kind of legal entity do I set up? And how do I register my business, apply for tax ID, and all that stuff? Funding. So the company cannot survive without money. Initially, there might be friends and family money, or SBIR grant, or you may have a rich uncle, it could be your angel investor. But then what? What happened after that? In biotech, as we know, is usually capital intensive. And how long can you go without outside investor coming in to really take the company to where you need to go? So I cannot underestimate, we cannot underestimate the importance of a co-founder. So the co-founder, generally not affiliated with the university, will be someone who is responsible for managing the day-to-day operations and the decision-making of the company. That person, because it's not associated with the university, will be the one negotiating a license with the university on the intellectual property. The faculty, him or herself, should not be should not be doing the negotiation with the university because of conflict of interest. This co-founder also needs to be a business person who can develop the business strategy and the product ideas, and how do we take the product to market, financial projections. A lot of this really is, the business operation. And also engaging with potential customers, strategic partners, and fundraising, a very important aspect of starting a company. So how do we choose a co-founder for a university Spinout? So faculty researcher is usually a scientific co-founder, and we need to find a co-founder with a business background. And we want a co-founder that has complementary skills and temperament with the scientific co-founder. Many startups fail, not because of technology and not even the market, because the management team. The management team don't work out, and the company falls apart. And we want the co-founder to share the faculty's the scientific co-founder, the vision, and also the value. And having similar work habits and emotional buoyancy will help, because startup is a highly emotional endeavor. There's going to be a lot of ups and downs. And how do you have someone on your team to be able to manage the ups and downs through the initial years? And ideally, someone who has an experience and background to potentially serve as a CEO or interim CEO, someone who is fundable and who can actually approach investors and raise outside capital. So investors, venture capital invest in people, not technology. People is what makes things happen. A fundable CEO, a CEO that the investor can trust, can navigate in troubled waters, can pivot, can change the direction of the company if necessary. So here are some of the things we look at when we vet CEO candidate for our Spinout. Do they have startup experience? Do they have a track record of raising capital? Can they build and lead a team? Can they actually lead product development and getting product to market? Again, track record and experience really count. And of course, growing revenue. And if an entrepreneur that has had successful exits, either through acquisition or IPO, the better. And industry expertise. And does the candidate have the right expertise and domain knowledge, as well as the network contacts, like industry partners, that is in the same space as the technology that is basis of the spin-out. So if you are spinning out a medical device company, it helps if the CEO has had FDA regulatory experience, especially with medical device, knowing the sales cycle and not just the approval regulatory cycle of a medical device, and have the right industry contact for the partnership. And for biopharmaceuticals, same thing. You know, if we're going to have someone leading a biotech company, we definitely want to find a CEO that has had experience with a biopharma company, and especially if that person has actually had a track record of taking a drug through the clinical trial to market. So you found a co-founder and the potential CEO candidate, and now you need to set up a business. What kind of legal entity or business structure do you set up? There's many business structure. I'm only going to talk about two because that's what we usually see. It's either an LLC or a corporation or a C Corp. We have faculty that wanted to go out there and look for SBIR, STTR grants. So they set up an LLC and they have someone in the LLC that's outside the university, so they can go after the grant. Which is fine if it's a company where you're going to continue to run and manage and you have a lot of flexibility, and it's a consulting services, or maybe just a small SaaS company, software as a service, and you're probably never going to raise outside capital. That's probably okay. But for most of the technology, if we wanted to scale, we want to be able to raise venture capital, and you need to have a C Corp. You have to be able to issue shares because LLC cannot issue shares, cannot go public, and you cannot raise capital because if you don't have an exit, then the investors are not going to invest because investors are there to invest for return. So we usually advise our startup, if it's going to be a real gig going forward, you're going to raise capital, you're going to issue shares, including issue share to your co-founders and management, then set up the C Corp, in particular, Delaware C Corp from the very beginning. You can do conversion from LLC to a C Corp, but it will cost money. And the more asset you accumulate in the LLC, the more costly and difficult it is later on to actually shut down that operation and convert to a C Corp. Why Delaware? And many people don't realize this. Just because you register your C Corp in Delaware doesn't mean your operation have to be there. If you look at all of the companies in California, the Apple and Google and Facebook, they're all Delaware C Corp, but their operation is not in Delaware. The reason is because Delaware has the most sophisticated corporate laws. So if you raise venture capital, no one's going to question Delaware corporation. So if you incorporate it in New Mexico or Idaho, somewhere else, at some point you might want to just think about changing it to a Delaware C Corp. And by the way, both LLC and C Corp protect you, the entrepreneur, from personal liability. Both of these, the liability outside your personal liability, which is very important. So the ownership of the company. And so what we see is faculty finds the co-founder, maybe their friend, maybe a postdoc, and let's split 50-50, we each own the company. Well, it's not that simple. So let's say you have two or more co-founders. How are you going to split founders' equity? And that in itself is a question that you have to think about, the value that is being given to the company and who's going to have the day-to-day operation going forward, what type of incentive and commitment you need from your co-founders. And so that ownership split is something that you really want to think about because it will be difficult to change later. And the other thing which is very important is vesting arrangement. In other words, let's say if you're going to give your co-founder 30% of the company, that needs to be there needs to be a vesting schedule. So a very common one is 4-year with a cliff, which means that if the person leaves within a year, he gets nothing, but after a year, you get 25%. So it's vested 25% a year. there's also different type of schedule where you get upfront and then it's vested over time. So we recently had a company where the faculty through its network found they thought it was a very good CEO, and the CEO sounded great and, check all the boxes. And that CEO convinced everyone should just, do the equity split and be done. Well, he didn't work out. And now they have to buy him out because there was no vesting schedule. So even though he was only been with the company for a little bit over a year, he has his whatever percentage of the company, and they have to buy him out. So definitely have a vesting schedule, and that should be the same for all co-founders. And so that, if certain executive doesn't work out, he's not walking away with all the shares or the ownership that you promised from the beginning. So there's usually a little bit of stock to the university when university license the technology, and it's usually a very small percentage, 5 to 10%. On the total issue and outstanding shares. So university will get diluted like everyone else. And I'll talk a little bit later about dilution of ownership. There's employee compensation to equity compensation to employees. Usually the venture capital will require a company to set up a equity incentive plan or sometimes called the option pool or ESOP, employee stock option plan, that you need to use that in order to attract the best talent as well as consultants, advisors. It could be 10%, 20%, depending on your situation. And an important thing to understand is that the company ownership will evolve as new investors and co-founders join the company. And so it's very important to manage an accurate cap table. So when an investor asks you for the cap table, you have all the paperwork and the numbers to back up. Basically, cap table is ownership split. Who owns what, how many shares. So this is kind of to illustrate how the ownership of the company can change. So let's say you started with just one other co-founder and you guys have agreed some percentage. And then you leave some a pool for employees, and you have some earlier angel investors, but a new investor come in and you still have some unauthorized shares. Authorized share that non-issue, and the investor wants to have at least 33% of the company. Well, then everybody else is going to get diluted. And later on, if you got another investor coming in, you don't have any more shares, you're going to have to issue new shares, additional shares for that investor to come in. Sometimes a lead investor wants to own 50% of the company. And so then everybody else gets diluted. So it's very important to understand what is it you're giving up when you receive capital. And don't undersell your company, and don't raise capital unless you need to, because otherwise it's going to cost you in terms of the company ownership. So cap table is going to change, and then financing. So think about the value of the company prior to receiving investment. It's often referred to as a pre-money valuation. And sometimes people really trying to bootstrap, raise non-dilutive funding like SBIR grants to continue de-risk the technology and build value in the company before they go out and raise money. So for example, if your pre-money valuation is $5 million and you're going to raise another $5 million, and then the investor is going to own 50% of the company. But if you don't want to give up 50% of the company, you have to think about that your pre-money valuation needs to be higher, or you raise less capital. So this has to do with whether you want to continue to retain management control, or you want to give up control to your investors. And finally, if you can explore non-dilutive funding like SBIR, STTR grant that help you build value in the company before you get outside investors where you have to give up equity, then I would say definitely do that. So the board of directors and the scientific advisory board, many faculty glance over this. They think they are the experts, and I don't need a board of directors to tell me what to do, or a scientific advisory board. These two are very important, especially for biotech companies. Scientific advisory board is very important. So let's look at what board of directors do. And it really should not just be the CEO and the scientific co-founder. This is the most integral part of the startup's internal management structure. The board makes decisions that really set the strategic direction of the company, from fundraising, acquisitions, IPOs, to hiring and firing of the executive. If the CEO is not performing, the board of directors can fire the CEO, all the way to budget and new product lines. And so you want to have individuals on your board of directors who are industry veterans that not only can assist in the strategic direction of the company, but also be a mentor to the CEO. If the CEO is coachable, but from time to time they need mentoring from an industry veteran, and also have access to key customers and strategic partners for growing the company. And that's what the boards are. The board is very valuable if you have the right people. The scientific advisory board are generally distinguished scientists and physicians in the field who can validate your scientific undertaking and provide expert guidance to your R&D activities. So if you're developing a cancer drug, you ought to have oncologists on your scientific advisory board. If you're developing a drug to treat type 2 diabetes, you probably want to have endocrinology and someone who really understands metabolic diseases on your scientific advisory board in order to really validate and guide your R&D. So COI, conflict interest, it's a big issue, and it occurs in all different forms and colors. And so it's very important. So if you're a faculty, you want to build a company, you have to really think about, am I going to be a university employee when I make a decision when I'm working versus am I a company employee? So it's not just the resources, the time and facility differentiation. You can say, well, I'm only going to work on Sunday in my garage. That's great. But if you're making a decision for the company that potentially could be in conflict with the university, you have to be cognizant of that. And we see that actually fail in various shape or form. And we also have faculty trying to get around university policy by having their little startup, and so that they can do other things. And sometimes there's commingling of intellectual property and the ownership is not clear. And let me just say this, commingling of IP where the ownership is not clear does not serve either the university or the company. The university, the tech transfer people, they're stewards of the university IP. It is their job to take that to market to benefit society. Company, if you have unclear ownership of IP, when the investor come in, they will do IP due diligence, and they don't like IP that doesn't have a clear title or ownership. So really watch out for the commingling of the IP. Who owns it? Who's going to own improvement? If you license IP from the university and the company is now making improvement, you might still need the university IP for the freedom to operate, and which I'll talk a little bit about that later. And so trying to think that you can get around the university, because you're going to make some improvement, you don't need the university anymore. You really have to think again, whether university actually own the IP that can block you. So just be very careful about that. And conflict interest, we had one faculty had a startup for 2 years, and he was out there representing the company and the university to the customers and funding agency as if we were the same legal entity. We're not, right? University and the company are two very different legal entities, which means information sharing should be done under NDA if it's not a university personnel, and transferring materials. We also had a case where a biologic material was transferred from the university to the company without an MTA, and things were being improved, and then back to the university without an MTA, a material transfer agreement. So just remember that the company and the university are two separate legal entities with two separate legal set of requirements. So you can't just mix in two as if they're the same entity. So let's say you have a co-founder, you've set up your legal entity, you got a pretty good management team, you're ready to build this company. You need to license the technology from the university. And first of all, it should be your company CEO or someone who's not associated with the university to negotiate the license. So I'm not going to go into detail, but generally, you know, if you look at a license, you have to look at the patents, the technology, and also licensed products. Is it going to be exclusive or non-exclusive? If you're building a company, raising venture capital, most of the time it's an exclusive license, because investors is not going to invest in a company without exclusivity, because that is a barrier to entry. The field of use, maybe you only need the patents for a specific field. And sometimes you want just that field, and because that will also trickle down to the financial terms associated with that field. The territory, whether it's worldwide or region. And for most, you know, biotech related pharmaceutical or medical devices is usually worldwide. And do you want to have the capability of sublicense? Maybe you need to have sublicense to a department, to a development partner. And you want to use a sublicensing revenue to fund your R&D. So you need to make sure you have sublicensing terms. The financial terms, these are fairly standard. There's an upfront fee. Sometimes the upfront fee can be very modest because you're a startup, you don't have any money, and then that could be in the form of stock, or 5%, 10% of your issue outstanding equity shares. Generally, the university will ask for reimbursement of patent expenses, especially for an exclusive license. And there's going to be royalty based on net sales that involve the use of licensed patents. There's going to be revenue based on sublicensing, milestone, which is very common in biotech, so biopharma. And let's say you're developing a drug. There's usually milestone payments associated with when you get to the IND stage, or maybe starting phase 2 clinical trials. There's also minimum annual maintenance fee, which is usually more modest. You're trying to maintain the license. And there's also non-financial terms. So I would say that, you know, with the number of the licenses I've negotiated, the financial terms actually takes less time. It sounds surprising, but the non-financial term, because the things like, how do we deal with patent matters involving a third party? In other words, what happens if a third party challenges the patent or infringe on the patent, right? So they're two very separate. How do you deal with that? Indemnification, warranty. University is not going to warrant any technology. Everything is as is. And a licensee often have to indemnify the university on all sorts of things. Reporting requirements, commercial milestones. You know, university is licensing this to a company exclusively, right? But we want to make sure that there's a commercial development that actually happens over an agreed timeline, or using the best commercial effort, actually developing the product to market. So what happened if the startup decided to partner with Pfizer, and Pfizer decided, well, you know, this is not going to be our most important drug to develop right now. We're going to put it in the back burner. Well, university needs to make sure that doesn't happen. And you as a company, if you want to partner with pharma, you also want to make sure that doesn't happen. So there's always going to be milestones as well as clawback, meaning that if you don't meet the milestone, either the university can terminate a license or change that from exclusive to non-exclusive. So there's all these permutations, which is usually negotiation between the company and the university. Intellectual property. So I mentioned that a little bit earlier. So a lot of time the researchers don't understand the patents. You don't need the patent to do whatever you want, in the sense that as long as you're not being blocked by someone else. The patent is really a right to exclude others from practicing the patent invention. And this exclusionary right, which is a monopoly right, is time limited, it's 20 years from filing, and also is territorial rights, meaning that if you need a protection in different countries, then the patents have to be filed and granted in different countries. And so, but granting of the patent itself does not give you, the owner of the company, to actually use the invention. So this is where, you know, the faculty researchers may say, well, I've got this license from the university. I'm going to go out, I'm going to practice this. Well, if it turns out what you're doing is an improvement of something where another inventor, another institution already have a patent on it, then you may have to get a license from that other company in order to practice the technology, which is a freedom to operate. University generally does not perform a freedom to operate analysis. It's very expensive. It's done by patent attorneys. And usually you can't really do the FTO analysis until you have a product. You know, is the product I'm going to launch to the market going to infringe on any patents. So it's a legal analysis and required a lot of patent analysis. So, and this is something that maybe the startup company don't need to worry about at the beginning, but should not wait, because you need to understand your competitive landscape. What are the patents out there that potentially can block you while you're doing the development? Or you don't want to spend millions of dollars to develop the product and you realize that you don't have the right to launch it to market because someone else owns the patent. So patent strategy needs to be aligned with business strategy. And so the patents are there to serve the business. Trade secret. So this can be any information, business or technical, or information where you consider is a secret sauce to your company, and that has economic value, and the company needs to take the step to protect that and to maintain the secrecy. So I'm not going to get into trademark and copyright. Copyright is relevant when you have a software that you could both seek patents, like some sort of method patent, but also have the software being copyrighted. So I'm not going to talk about this in detail, but just understand that as a company, there are many documents you have to manage, from the entity formation and governance to your equity compensation, employee document. Is there going to be employee handbook, policies? What if someone sues you? There's technology IP protection, all your financing rounds, your cap table, your pitch deck, and your history. What kind of information is out there because you've given it away, and all sorts of contracts from NDA, MTAs to license agreements and professional service agreements and collaboration agreements. So this is a lot to manage, and it's outside usually the skills and the time of a scientific co-founder. This is why it's so important to have a managed team in place that know how to do this. So I wanted to probably end with was really talking about how do we support a university Spinout to really maximize its chances of success. And there being research done to show that there's 4 key dimensions to a successful Spinout, and that is minds, management, market, and money. University generally have to provide the minds, right? The intellectual property, the technology development, and maybe to some extent the incubation services. But you really need management, market, and money in order to succeed. So looking at it from an ecosystem approach, you got the faculty entrepreneur, you have university that provide a variety of incubation services, including things like SBIR support, STTR support, NSF, I-Corp, where you can send inventors to learn a little bit about customer discovery and markets. But you need to have a CEO or management talent, either in your ecosystem or outside of your ecosystem, and potentially network of mentors. There needs to be industry sectors, either in your region or in your network, that potentially could be the industry partner to your startup, or someone who will be the early adopters, who will do the prototyping and the trials and with the startup company. Professional services, attorneys, IP attorneys, accountants, HR. Sometimes we have a startup where they're like, okay, who do we use for accounting firm? Who do we use for payroll? And so this is where sometimes university, if you have a network that you could maybe recommend or introduce, and then also access to capital. So I know in many of our states in the Western IDA, we don't have the kind of access to capital as the coastal regions. And what do we do? How do we build our network so that there's access to capital for our startups? So you really need the ecosystem in order to support a successful university Spinout. And I think I just have a couple other slides to kind of stress this point. So if you look at, I'm just going to go ahead and look at this. So if you look at university technology, it's usually very early stage. There needs to be de-risking. And NIH calls this the valley of the death. And that is going from, a lab, a concept, to a drug target, preclinical study, and all the way to clinical development. So what kind of resources do you have to actually help de-risk the technology? This can be from the university or can be from partners that really believe in university spend out in your region. So this is a very difficult part of it, and many universities don't have the resources to do the de-risking. And from the access to capital, there's the startup financing continuum, right? So founders may be able to put in a little bit of money, friends and family. Do you have angels in your network, seed capital and venture capital in your region? If not, how do you get an access to capital, especially early stage capital? And so a lot of times, I've seen universities spend out, get a couple SBIR, STTR, and then they ran out of money, things didn't work out, and basically ends because they're not able to find seed capital. When they don't have the right CEO who is fundable to actually raise the money, or there's no capital around, and they haven't de-risked the technology to make it actually attractive for the company to be fundable. So I think I'm going to stop here to see if there's anyone have any questions, and thank you.
Hi, Grace. This is Michael. While people are getting their questions typed in the chat, I thought I might ask one real quick. You talked about at the beginning, if you have a startup and you don't license, but instead create the startup, and you're looking for like that CEO for the startup, or maybe a mentor. What does that usually look like? Do they is the deal that they want equity in the company? Is it more of a payment? Like how do they navigate that deal?
Yeah. So as a startup, university spend out, generally the company does not have money. So you cannot hire a professional CEO. And also, if it's a CEO coming from a large company, they expecting a CEO position being paid. That's just not realistic. And that's probably not the right CEO anyways. Usually what we look for, and this is where the challenge is an entrepreneur. Maybe they've already had an exit. They want to look for the next gig. They're passionate about starting companies, and they really share the vision of the company, and they want to take this on as a challenge in the form of equity. And so it's really a co-founder CEO. So I've seen co-founder and a scientific founder from the university have equity split of 50-50. I've seen 40-60. That's probably all pretty good range. There are times where the faculty think, well, I invented the technology, I should have a lot more of the company. But what the researcher doesn't understand is that inventing a technology is only one small piece of the puzzle. You need someone who is committed to actually do all the other things that are necessary in order to have a product to market. And sometimes there's not that appreciation to being able to incentivize someone who's going to come in without pay and use sweat equity to build a company. And so that CEO is taking as much risk as anyone else to build that company. So often, if the CEO is really going to manage the day-to-day operation, 50-50 is, or maybe even more, is I think reasonable. But what's difficult, I think, in our ecosystem, but Reno's changing. We're seeing a lot more entrepreneurs moving here from California, but we still don't have a lot of entrepreneurs from the biotech industry. And to find a CEO who has a track record of taking a startup to exit and understand how to build a company, and that's difficult. And this is why, I think university needs to have a network of these entrepreneur in residence, EIRs, and they're usually either exited entrepreneurs, or someone who has been with the company but really, really have the passion to want to start a company, or someone who understands a particular industry so well that it makes sense for him to be the CEO because he's got all the industry contact. So having that in your ecosystem, I think, is very important. And we have that challenge as well. We have companies that are waiting to be spun out of university, but until I find a good CEO that I will want to have an exclusive license with that company, I don't think I want to spin it out, because for university to do the exclusive license, the company lock us up, right? And when we talk about licensees, we usually want a partner that we believe has the capability to actually taking the technology to market. And we will want the same for our startups.
Cool, thank you. Sort of in a obviously similar topic, we have a couple questions that came in the chat. You sort of addressed one of them, but going back a little bit, Danny asked, if set up as a Delaware C Corp, can a startup company still be considered a local business and attract state funding?
Absolutely. It's just a corporate, it's just an incorporation paper. So we have a number of startups that recently was formed as Delaware C Corp, but they're domiciled in Nevada, their operation is Nevada, and they qualify for all sorts of state incentives.
Cool, thank you. You sort of mentioned the people maybe from Cali moving to y'all's area, and so Paul mentioned that finding that CEO again, like especially in our Western idea states or just in like more central US is difficult. But it sounds like there's some movement from your point of view. Then we have another question from Danny. If a faculty member serves as a CSO or scientific co-founder, how is this COI with the university managed?
Yeah, so every university have their own COI plans and policy, but the faculty often can either be on the scientific advisory board or could be the CSO. But if you are the CSO, especially early stage, it can be managed. If you have a COI plan in place, meaning that, you know, where are you going to spend your time as an employee of the company and not as a university? Where are you going to do your work? And if you do anything with university resources, whether it's your time or using the lab, then you just have to make sure it's in your COI plan. Also, another scenario is that the company raised money, but they don't have the lab yet, so they need to contract the university to actually do the development work. And I see that a lot. And in that case, you're actually still working as a university employee to advance the technology.
Thank you. We have another question from Vincent. First, he says, this is a great overview. Could you share any thoughts, experience around molding or hiring postdocs to support faculty founders, tenure track, and any support services that either your university has provided or you know from other institutions or organizations?
Yeah, so a postdoc, so the problem with the faculty being a CEO is that the faculty has no intention of leaving the company. So they got one foot in the company, one foot in the university. That can't work, right? But the postdoc will eventually leave the university so they can actually focus on the company. So I think initially a postdoc, especially a postdoc that both really understand the technology, but also have the business acumen to do this, it can be that interim CEO. And eventually, and if he gets mentoring and help, he can get to a point where if the investors come in, sometimes investor will bring in the CEO that they want. So it will be that interim position. So that could be the case. Sometimes it could be an MBA. But again, these people have to be committed, because we've had cases where the student either start a company or they start a company with the faculty, and the minute the student graduates, they get a high-paying job, they're out of there, right? So it has to be someone who is committed to actually want to build the company and understand that it's not going to be easy. It's going to be a lot of work. And so it can be postdoc, can be MBA, really depending on the individual. But if it's someone who's never really done it before, and then it may not be as appealing to investors, because investors generally like to invest in people that have a track record. But it's not impossible, right? Because you have to be a first-time entrepreneur before you can be experienced entrepreneur. So we have a Reno Seed Fund here in Reno, and we have invested in first-time entrepreneurs.
Thank you. So we have another question from Bren. First, they said, thanks for the great review. Can you speak about how university faculty can make their biotech, medtech idea projects attractive to industry co-founders and or co-founders?
Yeah, so, we face the same challenge. That is, when we go out and talk to industry, they get really excited, then they ask for data. Well, we don't really have any clinical data, or we only have a little bit of mouse data. And what we often get is that, we'll talk to you again when you have more data. So biotech, especially in the pharmaceutical industry over the years, I was in private industry before I joined the university. The pharmaceutical company have become more and more risk averse, right? They rather pay a lot to license a phase 2 clinical trial drug than invest early and pay less. So until they see data, they realize that this is real and not just some concept that you dreamed up. You need to be able to show data. So this is where being entrepreneurial actually means trying to find funding, either partner with someone or find SBIR, STTR grant, partnering with a commercial entity to de-risk the technology, or internal funding. Some universities do have these translational research funding, including fellowship that you can use to generate data and de-risk to make it attractive. And I would say that's probably the single biggest challenge for most university technology, is that it's too early stage. So how do we de-risk it to the point that will be attractive to industry? So for pharmaceutical, it is very difficult. For medical devices, less so. We have a technology where they're able to find a little bit of research money here and there, and actually do a little bit of the clinical trial because it's just eyeglasses, and they're able to find people on campus. They partner with other departments, Department of Psychology and other places, and they're able to get data that can speak volumes. So it's not just a concept. But for pharmaceutical, I think sometimes it's about really getting, sometimes there's grants that are given by the research vice president, and you can use to do a little bit of preclinical work in order to, de-risk. It's all about de-risking. And if you can find funding to help you de-risk the technology, the more de-risk it is, the more attractive it is to industry partners.
Yeah, that makes sense. Danny had a follow-up question, I think from the presentation. Can you elaborate why granting a patent does not allow the inventor to use IP?
Yeah, so patents is way to exclude. When you have a patent, so let me see if I can find an example. Okay, so someone invented a chair that, and you want to now take that chair and you want to put some bells and whistles on it to make it an improvement. You can absolutely get a patent on those bells and whistles. But in order to build that chair with the bells and whistles, you need to have the patent. You need to be able to get a license from the owner of the patent that owns that chair, right? And so that will probably be, that's why, because you can always make an improvement on something that can be patentable. But someone may have a patent that covers a lot of things early on. So let me give you another example. Let's say if someone owns a composition of matter on a drug entity, a new molecule, okay? And then you decided that you have the formulation expertise to make that drug more bioavailable and improve all the ADME properties. You can actually get a patent on your formulation. But you cannot sell that drug because the chemical composition of that drug is owned by another patent.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Makes sense to me. Hopefully it makes sense to Danny. I'm sure he'll comment.
And so what happens, in when we file a patent, we're trying to get the broadest claim we can. Why? Because there's always going to be someone trying to do what's called a design around to get outside of the patent. And so for a chemical patent, for example, you might have 5 steps in a new chemical process, but we may want to only put 3 of those steps because that will encompass the invention and we don't have to worry about the other 2. Because if you put all 5, someone can just take out a step and still make the invention work and does not need your patent. So that's the patent that you got to claim to comprise those steps. And then you found a 4th step that really could improve the process. That's great. You can still get a patent with that 4th, with that improvement. But then you cannot practice the process because someone else already have a patent on those previous 3 processes. But previous 3-step process.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's more strategic, covering all your bases. So we have 3 minutes left. So we have a couple more questions though. But from Vincent, it's an investment ecosystem question. Do you have any thoughts of changes in venture capital as it pertains to impact investing or conscious capitalism as it pertains to university startups?
Yeah, so I have to understand venture capital. So first of all, there's a difference between angel investors and venture capital. I don't know if folks know the difference. Angel investor means that you're investing the angel's own money, his personal money. Venture capital are basically money managers. They invest someone else's money. So they have limited partner, including pension funds, endowment fund that goes into venture capital. It's an alternative asset of investment. Their job is to provide return to their limited partners, right? The pension funds. So yeah, there's all sorts of things they say, yeah, we wanted to invest in socially responsible, and they do. There's some funds only invest in certain area, but their primary goal, because they have to deliver, is return. And they're not going to invest in a company that they don't believe have a chance of a 10x return because they know some of the company in their portfolio is going to fail. Angel investors are a little different. They're investing their own money. They have more say on where they want to invest. They may have a heart for the region. They want to see a startup ecosystem grow in your region. They may want to fund first-time entrepreneur knowing that there's a high risk of failure. But they might want to do it because for them, there's a strategic return as well as just a financial return. And many angel investors, they're really there to help their ecosystem, help their community, and return. I don't want to say secondary, but it's not nearly as important as the professional managers whose job is to provide a return to their limited partners.
That makes sense. Is it okay? We have 2 more questions, but we have 1 minute left. So would you prefer we just do one more question? I'm not sure what.
No, we can go through them quickly.
Okay. From Bren, from your experience in Reno, working with universities in smaller towns, what would you say is the single best way they can invest to encourage faculty entrepreneurship?
So we don't have a shortage of faculty entrepreneurship. It's more like they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. They go off, they form a company, and then we're here to clean up the mess. So we're trying to develop more rigorous process. So, there's COI issues, or they form a company, they don't really have management. They go after SBIR grant because now they have an LLC and become an SBIR mill. And after 3-4 years, the company not going anywhere. That really doesn't serve them any good. And so if you really want your technology to be out in the marketplace, benefiting society, then you really have to think about, whether you want to spin off a company, and 2, are you the right entrepreneur to take that company forward? If not, find the right people.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Last question from Danny. Does university typically support SBIR grant submissions when the company is the PI, or the company has to do all the grant submissions and management?
So SBIR, STTR grants have to be submitted by the company. The small business concern, the SBC, has to be the applicant. So there are a lot of differences between SBIR and STTR in terms of fund allocation to the academic institution versus the company. And I understand that as a STTR, some of the funding agencies actually allow the academic to be the PI. But usually with the SBIR, the PI is, there should be a PI that represents the company and a PI that represents the institution. If it's a co-PI, because the institution is really just getting a sub-award. And so there have to be different individual. And this is where it gets muddy. When the faculty form an LLC, they don't really have a company. And so they're like, well, can I just be the PI? No, you need to have a real small business. So conflict interest issue is 1, and 2, the small business concern is the applicant. So they have to deliver whatever the deliverable is to the grant, and then there'd be a real PI. So a lot of times they'll form an LLC and hire a scientific person, and that person will be the PI for the grant.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Cho. This was a very thorough presentation, and obviously we had lots of questions at the end. Thanks for your time. Thank you everybody who attended. We have another webinar next month. You can find information on the Ascend website, and this webinar will be recorded and posted Monday. And so you can find that on the Ascend website as well. Thank you again, Dr. Cho, and I will see you guys all later.